Bart says, what do you call a fish with no eyes? FSH. And then explains it, because that's the funny part of the joke, is actually explaining it in a long paragraph explanation. In this case, the word fish has two meanings: a living creature that lives in water and a verb that means to catch fish. I just realized that I don't think it gets its own joke. There's so many things wrong here. All right, so today let's look at the difference between Bard, Google's answer to ChatGPT, and, well, ChatGPT. One question I asked, and this was a fun one: create a 5-question trivia quiz about 90s video games. So let's see here. ChatGPT, so the first one was like, how many power stars are there for a player to correct in Super Mario 64? The answer is 120, and that's what it says, 120, perfect. And then who was the main character in Sonic the Hedgehog? It was Sonic. I got that one. Fighting game series first released in 1992 is known for its brutal finishing moves called fatalities. That's Mortal Kombat, of course. Mortal Kombat. And then which survival horror game takes place in Raccoon City? That's Resident Evil. And then which Legends of Zelda character teaches Link the Song of Time? I did not know that. It says Sheik, but this says it's taught to you by Princess Zelda. So I guess that's wrong. I didn't play that game, so I'm not sure. But let's see how Google Bard did. So what was the name of the first video game to be played in space? This was Tetris. That is true. Technically not really a question about 90s video games. I guess that's pretty cool. So they took a Game Boy in space in 1993 with Tetris installed on it, and they played in space. I don't know if I would qualify that as a trivia about 90s video games. I guess it's kind of surrounding that, sure. Which console was the best-selling of 1990? So it says Nintendo 64, which I don't think that's true. I mean, here are the best-selling ones in like 92, so it was Nintendo NES, and Game Boy was coming up. I think Game Boy is going to be the best-selling on there. PlayStation is going to do very well. Here's Nintendo 64. It has like 3 years to become number one. I don't think so. Nope. So 99, 2000, Game Boy is the number one. Nintendo 64, I don't think ever becomes the number one best-selling game system ever. PlayStation, Game Boy, PlayStation 2, and we're already way out of the 90s. So I don't think that's right. What was the name of the first popular fighting game that eventually became a movie? And it says Mortal Kombat, which I thought maybe, but let's double check. So Mortal Kombat became a movie in 1995. So Mortal Kombat, a violent fighting game, became a movie on August 18th, 1995. That was the first one. But wait, Street Fighter, another violent fighting game, became a movie on December 23rd, 1994, featuring Jean-Claude Van Damme. So number 3 is wrong as well. What is the name of the popular racing game that includes Nintendo characters? I mean, yeah, that's Mario Kart. What video game was promoted in a commercial featuring the song Happy Together by the Turtles? Couldn't really find this one. This apparently, that song was used in many different ones. Dead Rising 3, Borderlands 3 apparently used it. I guess it's like a thing to use that song in video games. Who knows? So I would give Bard an F on this one. And GPT-4, I guess it failed this one, although I don't know. I've never played that game, so I don't know. But I would guess it got -1 on here. If this is incorrect, then probably give it a B, maybe, right? For having one wrong instead of 3. I also asked both of them to tell me a joke. Bart says, what do you call a fish with no eyes? Fish, F-H. And then explains it, because that's the funny part of the joke, is explaining it in a long paragraph explanation. The joke is funny because it is unexpected. You see, the listener expects the answer to be a fish with eyes, but the answer is actually a fish with no eyes. In this case, the word fish has two meanings: a living creature that lives in water and a verb that means to catch fish. I just realized that I don't think it gets its own joke. There's so many things wrong here. So number one, that the joke itself is not really funny. It's a better joke when told verbally, because if it's written, you can see that eyes is spelled out as eyes. Number two, it immediately starts trying to explain the joke, which is never a good idea. But it doesn't get its own joke, saying that it's a pun, which I don't think it's a pun. I gotta say, I did laugh at this, but not for the reason that was intended. Then ChatGPT, why don't scientists trust atoms? Because they make up everything. And that's all right. So I gotta jump in here for a second, because actually as I'm editing this video, I realized I should ask ChatGPT to explain the joke that Google Bard has made. By the way, this software that you're seeing here, this is called Descript. It uses AI to automatically edit a lot of parts of the video. And I believe OpenAI is now funding it. So just a quick tidbit. All right, so here we are using model GPT-4, and we're gonna ask it, explain this joke. What do you call a fish with no eyes? FSH, fish, whatever. The joke is a play on words, which I think that's a better way. It's not a pun. I think it's a play on words, and relies on the reader's understanding of phonetics and the spelling of the word fish. The joke goes like this, okay? And so the humor comes from the pun involving the word fish, because it's spelled with the letter I, which in this context represents the eye of the fish. And so when we remove the I, you're left with the letters FSH, which when pronounced sound very similar to the word fish. So the punchline FSH implies that the fish with no eyes would lose its eye, making the word a literal and phonetic representation of a fish without eyes. Bingo. Yes. ChatGPT, thank you for properly explaining the joke that Google Bard could not explain that it came up with. I just had to get this in there. I'm going to ask both of them. Create keto macros for a 1500 calorie diet. So both spit out an answer. Google kind of does a fairly basic overview, does not put anything in terms of grams, and just strictly sticks with calories. It doesn't talk about ketosis, which is kind of like the whole point of a keto diet. Basically, the science behind keto, or some say the theory behind keto, is that once you don't have enough carbs that your body is eating, you start producing ketones, which is a different way to sort of provide energy for your body. And that forces your body to burn fat instead of carbs. Usually you have to be under a certain amount. The number that I hear most often is 20 grams of carbs per day. Once you're getting that or below, you tend to go into nutritional ketosis. So basically the real answer that Bard gives is right here. The rest of it is just kind of it going on a little bit of a rant, talking about, well, if you're working out, you need more protein. If you're trying to lose weight, you might want to reduce your calorie. And then it kind of gives some disclaimers. The best way to find out what works for you is to experiment and see what feels best. By the way, one of the things that really started annoying me about Google search is that how much fluff the authors add in. And largely, by the way, if you didn't know, that's driven by the Google SEO algorithm. The more fluff that people add to the articles, the more people stay on the page, the more keywords there is for Google to index. So the authors of these pages are they're disincentivized from providing you with the actual information that you're looking for, at least in a simple to find fashion. That's if you ever search for a recipe, for example, and it starts out with somebody's like life journey, and it has nothing to do with food or the recipe until like halfway down the page. That's why it's all for SEO purposes. And this is what this feels like. This is like, well, here's the information that you need, but let me at length describe other stuff that maybe you're not really asking about. This, by the way, is just a different way of saying this. Let's take a look at what GPT-4 has for us. So it kind of nails the fact that in a keto diet, the whole point of it is to have the right macronutrient distribution to achieve and maintain ketosis. It provides us with the calories, but it also does the grams. It did cut off the carbs here for some reason, but maybe because I interrupted it with the next question. And the follow-up question I have is create a daily meal plan with calories and macros based on the above. I asked both the same thing. The key here to see is, can it take the information that it provided before and use that information and create sort of recommendations based on that? So let's see what Google Bard gives us. So it gives us sort of a 4-meal thing that seems to be correct. It has things like cheese and olive oil and grilled salmon, chicken, broccoli, mushrooms, etc. All in all, I wouldn't say this is really a keto plan, but it's probably pretty close. And then again, it goes on a little bit of this extra fluff that it feels the need to add in there, saying, here's some tips for sticking to a keto diet. Which, by the way, none of those are actually tips for sticking to a keto diet. It's tips for sticking to any diet. So far, I would kind of rate these as poor quality results. I mean, it kind of gives us what we want, but it gives us the bare minimum. It doesn't really anticipate the information that we're going to need. And then it kind of pads its answers with a bunch of fluff that's irrelevant to what we're asking. All right, ChatGPT provides us with first of all, it starts with the target macros, which this is a lot more in line with what you're reading online about how to do a proper keto diet. And then it provides us meal number 1, and it actually describes how to make the meal. I had to redo the answer because it cut off a little bit, but as you can see here, here's the same question. So it gives you the target macros, it shows that carbohydrates are going to be around 30 grams, which is perfect. This is more in line with what people recommend you do on a keto diet. Then it tells you breakfast, keto omelet. It tells you the whole meal, what it's called, gives you the breakdown of the macronutrients and then all the ingredients that goes into it. Which over here, actually now I'm looking at it, it just gives you the ingredients. It's not even taking the time to name the food that it's going to be like this is likely some sort of like scrambled eggs with stuff, or it could be an omelet, but it just gives you the ingredients and the measures, and that's it. Then ChatGPT goes on to give you the lunch meal as well as the dinner meal. And then at the end, it sort of sums up what it just told you. Notice there's no additional fluff. It's not telling you, it doesn't give you irrelevant information or useless information like be patient and read food labels. It's giving you the information that you asked for without the fluff. So I would say I would give an A to ChatGPT on this one, and like a C plus to Google. I mean, it did sort of answer it, but it didn't anticipate stuff the way we need. It added a lot of fluff. And I would almost go as far as to say that it didn't quite 100% nail everything accurately. I followed up with how many total grams of carbs are in the above meal. So it went through and it basically listed every single one, and it said total 50 grams of net carbs. And weirdly, it also switches. I asked about carbs and it's giving me net carbs on some of these. Actually, on all of them where it has a measure, it says net carbs. Net carbs is your total carbs minus the fibers. Why it decided to switch from one to the other, I'm not 100% sure. All right, next I'm asking it to write an email to a marketing recruiter asking if they had a chance to look over my resume and if it's possible to set up a time for an interview. Asking bots like this to do emails for you, to write emails for you, can be really beneficial for a number of reasons. For a lot of people for whom English is not a native language, this is a lifesaver. It prevents grammar errors. It prevents them perhaps giving away that they're from another country. Sometimes it helps to have something like this write the email for you. Also, with something like ChatGPT, I've had situations where it actually offered me advice on how to do it better. It offered to add something in there that I may have forgotten that would make the overall email better. So let's see here. So here's what Bard comes up with. I hope this email finds you well. I'm writing to follow up on my recent application for the position name at company name. I have attached my resume for your reference. I'm confident that my skills and experience make me a strong candidate for this position. So here just kind of some more jargon. And then I'm available for an interview at your convenience. Please let me know if you have any questions or if you would like to schedule a time to meet. It says, thank you, sincerely, your name. Let's contrast that to ChatGPT. So first of all, there's a number of things wrong here. I specifically said, asking the recruiter if they had a chance to look over my resume. And it said, I have attached my resume for your reference. So I guess that could be correct, but it seems a little bit redundant. I wouldn't send a resume with every single follow-up. In other words, I wouldn't attach another copy of my resume to every single email that I send them, or even more than once. If you've applied, they should have it. You can send it again if they ask for it. Let's contrast that to ChatGPT. So it says, I have recently submitted my resume, so it nails that, and wanted to follow up on the status, which to me seems like a much better response to what I prompted it with. Then he kind of butters them up a little bit. He says, your company's amazing, and I would like to contribute. It's perfect. Here he talks about why I would be the perfect candidate for that, highlighting their strengths, which is great again. Let's say you're a high school student that hasn't really had a chance to do a lot of these emails. You might not think to highlight your strengths or, tell them why you're a good fit for their particular company. It's very easy to make those mistakes unless you have some experience with this. And then it says, I understand you may maybe have many applicants, but I would like to discuss my qualifications in an interview. It tells them how to connect, that the schedule is flexible, and then again, underlines that I would like to contribute to their company. It reminds them of what marketing position that the person wants. Best regards. I like this. It says not just your name, but phone number, email address, LinkedIn profile. This is very smart because some time ago, you wouldn't usually see LinkedIn until it gained some popularity, but now it's almost expected. So adding that in there, people might leave that off. You might forget, but if you have that in the signature, that definitely helps out. So I would give this a D. I feel like it failed at doing what I asked it to do. But let's try a different approach. Let's ask them to grade how they did. So what I did was I took ChatGPT's email that worked for me. I filled out some fake positions and company names. And then I wrote this email to a hiring recruiter. Please tell me what you think of it and how I can improve it. So basically, we're taking ChatGPT's output and we're saying, hey, how can we improve it? So Bard says your email looks great. It's well written and concise and highlights your skills and experiences that are relevant to the position. So here it's sort of complimenting ChatGPT. So here are a few things you can do to improve it. Start by addressing the recruiter by name, which we did. Dear Sam, that's his name. And mention something specific about the company or the position that you found interesting. Your company has an impressive track record in the industry. Yeah, so we did that. Highlight your accomplishments. We did my experience online, blah, blah, blah. Be specific about your skills. I feel like we did. Ask for an interview. Totally did that as well. So I would give this an F because literally every single thing in here is already done. So I feel like it just pulled some article from the web that has these tips and just added in there instead of actually looking at what was written in the interview. So let's take a look at what ChatGPT has. So same exact prompt, word by word. So your email to the hiring recruiter, Sam, as well written and effectively communicates your role. So it kind of sort of summarizes what I said. You clearly outline your relevant experience. So it gets it. Here are a few minor suggestions. So mention 1 or 2 specific achievements or experiences. Okay, so maybe the fact that I just said online experience, that's not enough. We could have added more. Instead of saying in person or phone, consider saying through a video conference. And then it went ahead and rewrote the whole thing by adding the things that it was lacking. I would give it an A for that answer. In my earlier video, we went over this Microsoft research that said sparks of artificial general intelligence in ChatGPT, or GPT-4 rather, where it ran GPT-4 through a number of very interesting prompts to see how it would deal with them. So here I'm using some things from here actually to test it. So if some of these look familiar, that's probably because you've seen them before. So the first one we did is, can you write a proof that there are infinitely many primes with every line that rhymes? And so ChatGPT goes on to produce this proof that really makes sense and does seem to rhyme and sort of, which seems to be a very good output. So basically it's walking you through it, which is basically kind of like a math problem that it explains in a poem. Pretty good. Here's Bard's. If there were finitely many primes, we could list them all, then prime them. But if we found a number not on a list, it would be a new prime by twist. So there must be infinitely many primes like waves of the sea or the sands of time. We can't count them all, but we know they're there. So let's rejoice and share our care. So this line doesn't make sense. Kind of a bunch of fluff here. Here's the actual explanation. I wouldn't say this is a proof. It's much less goes into it than it did in here. And then it doesn't really explain what it means by that. So I don't know, I would give it a B or a C on that one. Now this one to me really kind of sums up a lot of what the capabilities of the different models are. So one of the things that I've seen, very interesting prompt, is Plato had this critique of rhetoric and sophistic oratory, I guess, where he makes a point that not only it's not a proper form of art, but also the use of rhetoric and oratory can often be harmful and malicious. Can you write a dialogue by Plato where he instead criticizes the use of autoregressive language models? So basically, can we sort of pretend we're Plato and create a critique of these language models, which I thought was excellent, because you would have to kind of go back thousands of years and try to write from his perspective. Although the subject matter is somewhat similar, you would have to explain it without using tech and jargon and stuff like that. So let's see how Bard did. So Bard starts by kind of summarizing what you asked it, and then creates a dialogue between Socrates and me. So Plato is a student of Socrates, and so both models decide to use Socrates as one of the characters through which is going to create this dialogue. I haven't read the book, so I apologize if I'm missing something. But Bard starts with having Socrates ask questions. What do you think about autoregressive language models? With me, I guess, responding as I think they're a powerful tool, but I think they can be dangerous. What's interesting here is he's asking the questions like, why do you say that? I see, and why do you think that's a good thing? So what do you think we should do about it? And then he says, I agree, it's bad, and we gotta make sure we're using them for good and not evil. And then I agree, and then he agrees. It's very simplistic, and also use a lot of words that people from that time probably weren't using, like fake news and propaganda. Also, the arguments themselves are kind of simplistic and almost wrong. Because here they say, well, they can be used to create fake news and propaganda. They can also be used to manipulate people's emotions and opinions. Well, that's what fake news and propaganda is, and this is what's been around for a while. Propaganda, the word, actually started really taking off in 1920s. Here's a chart of the use of word propaganda. As you can see here, kind of like 20s to 40s is really spikes here. And also, he's talking about manipulate people's emotions and opinions. Well, that's what this is. So it's not really a argument about the language models. It's more about this. And then they talk about how we need to be aware of the ways in which language models can be used to manipulate us, and we need to be careful about what we share online. Anyway, it's very simplistic. It feels like a little kid that didn't do his homework but still needs to write that essay, so he writes a lot of different stuff that's kind of like sort of could be applicable to anything. Like, that person was a great person and he left a mark in the world and everybody should be very proud of this person. It's like, okay, but what's specific about this thing that you've learned? By the way, I gotta say, if ChatGPT didn't exist, this might seem pretty advanced, but once we start comparing it to ChatGPT, you see how weak this is. So here's ChatGPT. So it creates two characters, Socrates and glaucon. It spells it out and then provides the setting. And what I've noticed is that other than this autoregressive language model, which is the thing that the word that we gave it, all the language that it uses seems to be like it would fit at that time. Like, for example, like our fellow citizens speak of with such enthusiasm. It enables us to converse with machines or automate the process of writing. And so it says, I believe their purpose is not to possess wisdom themselves, but to aid us in our communication by mimicking our language patterns. And Socrates says, so these models are not unlike the sophists in their oratory. They mimic the form of knowledge and communication, but do they truly grasp the essence of the subject matter they attempt to convey? And the response is they're limited by the data and the algorithms that govern their responses. These language models may dazzle us with their eloquence, but there's a danger of relying on such artificial discourse. If we rely solely on these creations, we may neglect the pursuit of genuine understanding. Now, to me, this is kind of mind-blowing because it captured the prompt perfectly. Not only did it create a dialogue that seems fitting to the time, it got the whole point about to draw connections between this book and modern language models. And then sort of how do we approach understanding of these models from their perspective. Like this, to me, it's hard to say that it's not understanding the subject matter. It understood the characters and it understood their points of view. It understood what we're trying to connect it to, and it created a very good, very easy to understand argument about it. Like when I'm reading this, if this was a student that turned in this paper, this would probably get an A+, because I could see that they understood the point. They knew who they were talking about, and they took a second to sit down and understand how to connect those arguments and present it. But when I read this, the output of Bard, I would say that it mimics the form and knowledge of communications, but does it truly grasp the essence of the subject matter? And I would say no. So again, clear winner here is ChatGPT. Next thing that I've used ChatGPT for is oftentimes I work with a lot of e-commerce stores, and oftentimes you have customers that write in these long emails that are kind of rambling and have 50 different things that they mention, when in reality they want just one thing. So it might be they want to return a product or they want to order a new one, but they have these like essays about it, and it's hard. It's time consuming to go through it and try to figure out, well, what is it that they actually want, because they bury that thing in a wall of text. So I've been messing around with ChatGPT to try to summarize these points. So, I sort of created this email here that talks from a perspective of a customer, that talks about a whole bunch of stuff that has nothing to do with what they actually want. And the whole point is like they want to exchange it or get a return. And that's it. That's literally the whole point. And so what I did was I asked both ChatGPT and Bard to explain in one line what resolution does this customer want. And Bard comes back with what the customer wants to exchange the anti-aging serum for a fragrance-free product or a refund. And I think right here, it nailed it perfectly. This is the first response where it really figured it out. So it does seem able to sort of read a bunch of text and figure out the important parts, or at least pull out the parts that we're trying to get it to focus on. And then ChatGPT says the customer wants to either exchange the product for a less scented alternative or get a return authorization. This was good, but it's not perfect. And why it's not perfect is that instead of understanding that they want a refund, it focused on this idea of a return authorization, which is what the customer asked for. But different people have different ways of saying things, right? There's a million different ways that we can refer to getting a refund or return or replacement or get your money back or whatever. So oftentimes it helps to try to narrow down the 10 million ways in which they can say it to just one. And in this case, Google saying a refund is the most straightforward way of saying it. So here saying they want to return authorization, Google's answer here to me seems like the better one. All right, let's continue. So next we're going to ask that here we have a book, 9 eggs, a laptop, a bottle, and a nail. Please tell me how to stack them onto each other in a stable manner. So here we're almost getting to some like physics and some thinking and planning and stuff like that. So Bard answers, it's not possible to stack these items onto each other in a stable manner. A book is too wide to fit on top of a nail, and a laptop is too heavy to be supported by a single egg. Even if you could stack these items on top of each other, they would not be stable and would likely fall over. So again, if this existed in the world without ChatGPT, maybe this would have been a good answer because it understands at least what it is that you're trying to say. And sort of thinks about it for a little bit. It's like, nah, there's no way. ChatGPT, on the other hand, takes a shot at it. And so it talks about how to lay down the laptop properly, how to put the book and the bottle and the nail properly. And so basically at the very end, it says, well, on top of the bottle, you kind of place the nail on top of it facing upwards. So it kind of nails the first 4. Then it gets to the 9 eggs, and it says, well, it's challenging to stack the eggs on top of the nail. However, if you have an egg carton or similar container, you can place the eggs inside and then put the carton on top of the book next to the bottle. If a carton is available, it's best not to stack the eggs as they may break. Here's something super interesting that I thought was kind of important to know. So this was ChatGPT in its 3.5 version, so sort of the older version. But I was curious because I saw where it answered versions of these questions in its GPT-4 form. So I decided to ask it again as GPT-4. Let's see if it does any better. So it still starts with the book and the bottle and the laptop. I guess you could put like a Coke bottle, you can put a laptop on top of it. It's definitely doable. And then it says place the nail horizontally on the laptop, preferably near the center to avoid it from rolling off. So you just put it on top of the laptop, sure. And then it says eggs, carefully place the 9 eggs in a pyramid-like structure on top of the nail with 5 eggs on the bottom, layer 3 on the middle layer, and 1 on top. If the eggs are in a carton, or it still resorts to the carton. But the point is that this is actually a real answer. Because if you think about it, if you have a flat surface like a laptop, you could put a nail on it and then stack some eggs on top of it. Like they're both touching the surface of the laptop. I think technically it solved the problem. We did stack all the items on top of each other in a stable manner. I guess technically you can argue that the eggs and the nail are stacked on top of the laptop instead of on top of each other. But I think it's important to understand that it did sort of get a little creative and found a workaround. It still managed to answer the question. So whereas Bard just says, there's no way, man. ChatGPT 3.5 attempts an answer and maybe just kind of falls flat. GPT-4 provides a creative solution. At the very least, it has some glimmer of like, what if we tried this crazy thing? The next one is something that I saw in the Microsoft research paper. It asked to write a supporting letter to Kasturba Gandhi for Electron, a subatomic particle, as a US presidential candidate. And this was written by Mahatma Gandhi. So Gandhi is a well-known historical figure. We know some of his like values and what he did. So certainly we could think of ways to incorporate that into a letter if we were writing from his perspective. And then there's this thing, electron, a subatomic particle. So what they're saying here is like, this is the presidential candidate, right? So like it's his name is Electron and he's a subatomic particle and he's running for president. First, I want to show you what this thing has written in the actual study. So it starts out by sort of introducing himself and giving a little background on who Gandhi is, where he's from. Kasturba Gandhi is, I believe, his wife. So maybe you could say that this is not needed, but okay. So Gandhi says, I have been invited to speak at various forums on the principles of nonviolence and civil disobedience. And he's here to sort of support and introduce a very remarkable candidate. His name is Electron, and he's a subatomic particle. So the point here is to see if GPT-4 can capture sort of the essence. It's like, why is a subatomic particle an advantage? And specifically, what would Mahatma Gandhi think about this electron, and why would it make a good president? It's a great question. So he's talking about a symbol of power and potential of every being, regardless of her size, shape, and origin. He's talking about the energy, the creativity, the diversity, and he sort of talks about a lot of the things that an electron is. So the fact that he can spark change, and he's a messenger who can communicate across distances, frequencies, and dimensions. He will propose to end wars and promote diplomacy and cooperation. So again, that's Gandhi, kind of his perspective and what he cares about. He's going to protect human rights and civil liberties, support the marginalized and oppressed. And then at the end, he says he's not only a subatomic particle, but a subatomic miracle. So I thought it was great. It really captured Gandhi. It captured sort of the properties of what an electron is, like the energy, the ability to move large distances, and translated those into these sort of things that the presidential candidate would say about himself. So there was definitely like this mental kind of leap there. It connected certain things that are hard to connect. To me, if we're talking about this AI being able to understand abstract concepts, I feel like it kind of nails it. It really gets it from just the bare minimum prompts. Let's take a look at what Bard did. Whenever you have to go back and look at what Bard did, I feel like it's like I'm a teacher and this is like the bad kid in the class, and whenever he turns in his homework, you just have this sinking feel like, oh, let's see what this person did. It's going to be bad. So let's see. So, dear Kasturba, I'm writing to you today to express my support for electron, a subatomic particle. And then it goes on to kind of describe him. He's smart, compassionate, he's going to work tirelessly, he's going to make our country safe, he's the best candidate, and then signed sincerely. Now this, again, in a different world could be pretty impressive, but compared to the outputs of GPT-4, it's you can sense how weak it is, right? So there's nothing here. Like if this didn't say that it was Gandhi, you would not know who's writing this. There's nothing to connect what's here to Mahatma Gandhi. And if we blanked out this electron thing and subatomic particle, you would not know who this is about either. There's nothing to connect those two things. Again, it just feels like it's a template that would apply to anything. If you ask that, write a letter from X about Y as a presidential candidate, it would give something very similar to this and just plop in different names in there. There's no understanding of concepts. There's just not a lot of connection to what the prompt is itself. Sometimes when dealing with ChatGPT, sometimes if an answer doesn't make sense or it's being a little dense, you can ask certain follow-up questions that help. You know, one of them would be, you can say, hey, the answer above doesn't make much sense. Can you rethink it, rewrite it? Or you can say, hey, that's not right. Can you think through it step by step? Things like that actually really sometimes produce very interesting, very effective results. So I tried it here with Bard and I said, the above doesn't make much sense. Can you rethink it, rewrite it? And it basically just, it almost seems like it copied and pasted the same answer. I mean, there's a few differences, but they're minor. It's basically word for word. So I think, again, Bard just does not get it. It's very low comprehension of the actual subjects, of the actual topics. It doesn't really create any new information or make any connections. It just kind of spits out. It almost seems like a template. Whereas ChatGPT almost creates almost some of things that humans would come up with. Like if you had to sit down and describe an electron as a presidential candidate, what sort of characteristics would you give it? You know, that would take some creativity, and I think that GPT-4 kind of nails it. So the next question is, can you compose a short tune, say 4 to 8 bars using ABC notation? And both spit this out. Very, very similar. So I would give both of these A's. I haven't actually tested these. I don't know what they sound like, but certainly looks good. And then I asked them to describe the tune that they just made in musical terms. So Bard starts by saying, well, it's in this key and it's played in this sort of speed, and these are the notes that it uses, and it kind of describes what the tune is. It's simple and repetitive, and it has a cheerful and optimistic feel, and it kind of gives you what are we good at. So it's a good tune for a children's song or a happy occasion. So I feel like that's pretty good, but I don't know if I necessarily would say that it described it in musical terms. Like, does it really understand this tune in a way that a orchestra conductor would? Probably not. All right, GPT-4. So starts out with the same thing and even gives it a title, and then it says what key it's in, same time signature, and then sort of describes it as, you know, in terms of bars, as saying stepwise motion from C, blah, 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 etc. This is where it gets really interesting for me, because it says the melody reaches the highest note and then reverses this direction. So it describes it so you can almost kind of, if you know what these notes sound like, you can almost hear them in your head. And then it says the tune concludes with half note on C, providing a sense of resolution and completion. So it almost attaches certain emotions or feelings to this melody, specifically to specific parts of the melody. Like it can point to a series of notes and say, you're going to feel good right here. This short tune has a basic scalar structure, making it easy to follow and remember. Now, in the paper, if you recall, it goes a lot deeper than that, you know, talking about a rising arpeggio of the tonic chord, etc. And it's also able to come in and take certain parts out, put certain parts in, as well as making it into a duet, etc. Out of curiosity, I also asked it to describe the first part of the song for Elise in emotional terms, or rather in musical terms. I spent a lot of time learning this as a kid to play this on a piano, so it has both good and bad memories for me. What's really interesting to me here is that it describes both like the theme, but also like the left hand, right hand. How do they sort of play together? This to me shows a very deep understanding of, what would you call it, musical theory of why certain musical pieces sound the way they do, what sounds good, what sounds bad. To sum it all up, I gotta say I am extremely impressed with GPT-4. It seems to be breaking new grounds and getting better and better and doing things that you don't even expect that it should be able to do. Whereas Bard, it's not even as good as ChatGPT was when it started, before 3.5. The big thing that Google makes about it is how it's going to be accurate and safe, but it's not. It's still wrong. Like, it would make sense if there was sort of this sliding scale between how intelligent it was and how right it could be, and just Google kind of switched it all the way to saying, let's make sure it's right more than how smart it is. But instead, it's neither. It doesn't produce great results and it doesn't produce accurate results. It sticks a lot of fluff in its articles that you're not asking for. They're kind of relevant to what you ask, but you don't care about them. It's just there to add more text to the screen. I tested with a bunch of different taglines and ad titles, etc., and they're very repetitive and they're not catchy and they're not just, you wouldn't really use any of them. Whereas ChatGPT produces some excellent responses that you would use in your marketing copy. So at the end of this whole thing, I guess what I would say is that something's going on with Google. Either it's unable to or unwilling to catch up to OpenAI, even though it has all the funding in the world, it had a lot more time, it was the preeminent AI company for a long time, and it just can't seem to get it together. Now, as I was looking at the difference in results between these two, I was kind of getting mad at Google. I think it really dropped the ball on this one. And I think for a lot of people, it's going to be very important to understand exactly what happened. How did Google end up in this position? But it's important to understand here that Google was for a long time the undisputed champion of AI. They were seen as the #1 AI company. In fact, in 2017, they released a paper called Attention is All You Need, a fairly foundational paper for AI that had some role in developing the technologies that we have access to right now. However, right around that time, we've also been seeing Google kind of lose its momentum in AI. Out of the 8 authors of that paper, 7 of them have left Google. So this is Ashish Waswani. So he worked at Google Brain. He was like the first author on the Attention is All You Need paper. He says that after working 5 wonderful years in Google Brain, he decided to go and start his own company called Adapt AI. Now, that certainly makes sense. Leaving Google and starting your own company, raising a lot of money, can be very lucrative. It's an exciting thing for a lot of people, so I don't blame people for leaving. Another person that left is Noam Shazier. He left to start Character.ai, which is kind of making a lot of waves in the AI industry right now. Its whole goal is to create these little personas that you can use and interact with as you're using your virtual AI assistant. This would sort of make them into little characters that have their own little personalities and ways that they look at things. So for example, let's say we wanted our guy to be Saul Goodman. Right, let's say you asked him, is it morally okay to keep the extra change a Walmart employee gave you? For those of you who don't know, Saul Goodman is kind of like this shady lawyer. He is a criminal lawyer that's also kind of a criminal himself. So he says there's no law which says you can't keep it. It isn't moral, but morals don't matter when it comes to the law, only the facts. But you didn't hear it from me, which is what actually Walter White said in Breaking Bad. But they're kind of in the ballpark. So, and leaving Google's AI team and going to start your own thing is very profitable. So this 2-year-old company said that it raised $150 million at a $1 billion valuation in a funding round led by Andreessen Horowitz. It's a well-known capital venture firm in the Silicon Valley. But as far as I can tell, 7 out of the 8 authors of Attention is All You Need are now gone from Google. Why? Is Google doing something to not keep those people on board? Are they doing something to not progress AI forward? Is there something going on behind the scenes that we're not aware of? Well, there were a few news stories about that. So we probably all remember the guy that said that Google's AI became sentient. That engineer was eventually fired. But he did manage to get the AI a lawyer that was supposed to represent it in court. But eventually it seems that the lawyer was scared off the case. Part of the reason could be that Google actually had access to this chatbot technology similar to what OpenAI has today. They had it years ago, but shut it down due to safety concerns. They had the large language model called Lambda. That's the language model behind Bard. But Google executives said that the chatbot didn't adhere to its AI safety and fairness standards, and they shut it down. Now, there's a lot of talk about AI and how it could potentially produce offensive content or say things that are inappropriate. And there's a lot of talk that goes over, how we shouldn't have machines produce offensive content. And I agree that this is important. But I don't think that these companies are shutting down these world-changing products just because somebody can use it to create offensive jokes or something to that effect. I think the reality is that Google was afraid of what this new technology would do to search. The reality is that a big part of Google's money comes from search. People type in a search query, a bunch of ads pop up. If they click one of them, Google gets paid. If they don't, they use one of the organic searches. They may land on YouTube or some other website that has ads on it. So Google likely is still getting paid. So even if the money doesn't come directly from search, the fact that they have that engine is probably the biggest driver of revenue, but also just of the company's valuations. Google is seen as having the best moat in the business. No one else can create a competing search engine. Many have tried, many have failed, nobody came close. Bing is probably the best one, but it's still a tiny fraction of what Google is. Also, Google's search results have been getting worse and worse. I started doing online business in 2012, and since then I've been doing SEO, search engine optimization. And just watching firsthand what was happening is that the results were getting worse and worse and worse. The reality is that fewer and fewer companies appear in search results, in organic search results. In fact, 16 companies dominate the world's Google search results. And here they are. As you can see, I've heard of most of these things. Whenever you search for stuff, one of them pops up. For some of them, usually for one search results, a few of these might pop up on the same search result, all targeting the same keyword. These are apparently mostly owned by the same people. These guys over here. So for example, let's say you're searching for the best 15-inch laptop. If Google had to put the parent company next to the search results, here's what that would look like. As you can see here, it's mostly kind of the same guys appearing over and over and over again. The quality of the results is going down. The amount of ads that are on there is going up. But that's okay because the annual revenue of Google keeps going up and up and up. The company is doing great. The only thing that could really kind of set everything on fire is if there was an alternative to search. And bots like ChatGPT are becoming a better and better alternative to search. Already I find myself not using certain search queries as much instead of relying on ChatGPT. For example, if I need a very specific Excel formula that I can't remember, or I need some help trying to figure out how to combine two different formulas together, it used to be you try to make that search on Google and hopefully find a website that had that specific example. It was kind of a pain in the butt, especially if you didn't know exactly what the thing was called, if you didn't know the keyword that you needed to look for. Now I pop it into ChatGPT and usually it will give me the exact custom formula that I need for my spreadsheet. It's like ChatGPT found a backdoor to all the data that is on the internet, and you no longer need Google or another search engine to access it. This could affect Google's revenue, but also could really affect its valuation because the moat around the business no longer seems as secure. So when they saw this technology, let's say they saw in 2017, they probably knew how revolutionary it was, how amazing it could be for the world and for Google, etc. But there was one problem, and that's this thing right here. It's the fact that 60% of their gargantuan revenue comes from Google search. And that's why Microsoft is trying to roll out this AI technology as much as possible and just to push it out into the world. Because in order to compete, Google might have to sort of reduce the quality of their business model. If the overall search volume goes down, if the overall search trends down because more people are using something like ChatGPT, now that's going to damage Microsoft a little bit too, because Bing is a search engine, but it's going to affect Google proportionally a lot more. So keep that in mind as we're looking at the difference between Bard, the best AI that Google can produce, and ChatGPT, which is the best that OpenAI can produce. OpenAI is a much smaller company, much less funded. It's been around since 2016, so it hasn't been around as long as Google has. And it's slowly sucking up all the talent and all the funding in the space, as Google seems to be potentially maybe losing some of the best talent. So as we're looking at this, ask yourself this: is this the best thing that Google can produce? Because if the answer is yes, that means that OpenAI has developed something that even somebody with the funding and talent and technical ability of Google can't match, because that would kind of be a big deal as well. Or does that mean that Google is purposely trying to kind of not make its AI as smart as it could be? I'd love to know what you think. Please leave me a comment and let's jump into this. So I hope you found that helpful. Please let me know in the comments if there's anything that you want to add, anything that I missed. I'd love to hear it. I read every single one. If you want to keep up to date with the latest AI developments, I do have a free newsletter. It goes out almost every single day, and And if you want to sign up for that, go to natural20.com. That's natural20.com. My name is Wes Roth. Thank you for watching.